Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Jing Song, and I'm the Director of Content Marketing at Hyperproof. I'm also the principal researcher and author of this year's IT Compliance Benchmark Survey and the report. I'm really glad that you took the time out of your day to spend time with us. We're really excited to share the survey findings with you and kind of some key best practices. And over here, we also have Matt Ladle joining us, speaking on this webinar as well. Hi, Matt.
Hey, JC. And hi, everybody that's joined. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm Matt Lato. I'm the Chief Growth Officer for Hyperproof, and get the opportunity and the pleasure to work with JC every day. But really excited to talk with you guys about, this year's survey. And, a happy Wednesday again, and looking forward to working through this together. And yeah, let's jump right in. Thanks, JC.
Yeah, a quick reminder before we jump in, just want to let you know this webinar is being recorded, so you could actually go back and watch it on demand. After the webinar itself, we will automatically send you the full compliance benchmark report as well, so you can get that in your inbox. Okay, with one last thing. We will have time after this presentation for some live question and answer. We do want to hear from you. So if you have a question, please just type it in and we will get to your questions at the end. With that, let's jump in. So here's just kind of a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. Obviously, we'll be sharing the most interesting and relevant findings from our survey with you. But additionally, we want to kind of share with you what are some key steps organizations can take if you want to get better at managing IT risks consistently and more efficiently. And that's what the compliance operations methodology is all about. With that, I'll just give you a quick overview of the survey so you understand who were the participants in the survey. So we decided, the survey was just done recently in December 2020. It went out to over 1,000 people. About 70% of them work for companies headquartered in the United States, and about 30% work for companies headquartered in the UK. Everybody in the survey come from the technology sector, where protecting data and customer data, corporate data is really important, and so security is really important to them. We surveyed people from companies of all different sizes, so you can see the breakdown over here. And we have companies with a single location as well as companies with more than 10 locations. And so everybody we talked to for this study are people who are directly involved in making decisions about cyber risks and IT risks, and or involved in IT security compliance. So this is a breakdown of the type of people and their decision-making involvement for our survey. And this is just a little bit more information about how these people are involved in making decisions regarding cybersecurity and risk management for their organization. This is a breakdown of primary job functions. As you can see, the vast majority, they sit in IT, but a significant portion, they actually sit directly in information security or IT audit, IT compliance. We have some folks in management as well, and then just a few additional folks in these other functions. Just a quick snapshot of the type of job titles in our survey. But again, the important thing is these people they said they're directly knowledgeable about, and they're directly involved in these kinds of cybersecurity decisions for their organizations. We'll just share kind of some snippets and highlights of the key results, but want to let you know the survey report itself is actually quite comprehensive. It covers a variety of different topics, ranging from companies' budget and staffing plans to their concerns, current practices, current challenges in the realms of IT risk management in general, IT vendor risk management, security assurance. And then we also have a lot of questions to understand what kind of tools they're using to manage their operations. And with that, before we share the results, I just want to turn it over to Matt to give us a little bit of context and kind of ground us in what's happening today, what's happening today in the risk landscape.
Great. Thanks, JC. Yeah, so I'm sure for everybody on this, on the call here today or on the webinar, the world took a very interesting turn in 2020, and presented us with a whole new set of challenges as if we didn't have enough already. So I think it starts with COVID. Obviously, I can't imagine that there's anybody on the planet at this point that is not aware of that, but it resulted in some very systemic changes in the IT landscape. Probably the most obvious one is, JC and I, as an example, last year when we talked through the previous year's survey, we had the opportunity to actually be in the same conference room together. And do this together. That's not happening today. We're in our respective homes, doing the webinar today. And that's just indicative of what all of us, or at least so many of us, are dealing with, is that, what one part that changed for all of us as a result of the pandemic is we're working remotely a lot more often. And that changed kind of, the nature of what can happen in relationship to cyber attacks. We provided a whole new set of vectors for people to attack us from. And so certainly that's one big systemic change in the landscape from previous years. Not that we hadn't been worried about remote workers before, but it obviously became a lot more prevalent quick in 2020. Another one, is just obviously using third-party software and some of the risks that are related to it. Became even more obvious, as if it wasn't obvious enough. And I think, the easy example to point to just on a current basis is SolarWinds. Obviously, that was a major attack. They leveraged third-party software to conduct it. And I think, unfortunately, we can go back every month over the past year and see, that type of news-related article again and again and again. And I think it's so much of it's related to where we all use so many more cloud services. I don't see us ever, going back to the Stone Age or whatever and working with on-premise data centers. We're not going back there. But I think what it has made us more sensitive to is this third-party risk, and the fact that we're putting, very sensitive information into these solutions, and there is a risk that those can be compromised. And so I think we're all even more aware of that than we were previously. And then I look at the final piece as far as just the landscape change. Privacy, we knew, I think we've all been aware that privacy is becoming a larger concern. And I think it took on an even bigger concern in 2020. And I expect that once we actually exit the pandemic, it will become even more prevalent. It's kind of taken a bit of a back seat to some of the larger issues in front of us. But I think privacy is not going away. We saw the enforcement of, GDPR heavily enforced in the EU, and expect that that's going to remain the case and probably get even worse here in the months and years to come. So what does all of that mean? I think it has major implications for the way that we think about managing IT risk going forward, and how to get even more disciplined. I mean, I applaud, a lot of people on this call, and a lot of people that I have the privilege and opportunity to talk to every day. they work their tails off to manage IT risks. But it's, we'll walk through some data here in a second, but a disciplined approach is sometimes difficult, not because I think all of us want that, but it's become all the more important to achieve. And then, so I think that's a major implication of what's happening above. And I think the other piece that's happening that's impacting all of us is the trustworthiness piece. And we refer to it as zero trust. We've effectively entered into a place where everybody needs a security assessment. Everybody needs a SOC 2 report. People, need to demonstrate their trustworthiness now in ways that we didn't have to previously, which is an implication of some of the things above too. With that, JC, I'll hand it back to you and look forward to kind of touching on some of these things later on in the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. So the first kind of thing, set of questions we ask in the survey is just to understand how aware are companies, right? Are they aware that they want to take a more disciplined approach to managing IT risks? Are they trying to, resource staff and are they adequately resourced to do so? So one of the key questions we asked was around budget for IT risk management and compliance overall. And, in an environment where concerns about cybersecurity attacks are really high, and, data privacy regulations are definitely very top of mind for companies and for consumers as well, it's not surprising for us to find that more than half, the 54% of surveyed companies in this particular survey, they are expecting to spend more money on IT risk management this year than they did last year. Only a minority, 16% of companies in the survey said they plan to spend less money this year on IT risk management. And we also asked people specifically about their compliance budget because, in general, we know compliance obligations seem to be growing for organizations. We wanted to prompt respondents to consider a budget that includes technology, staffing and training, advisory services, and audits as well. And we found that virtually everybody in the survey said they do plan to increase their compliance budget by at least a small amount, if not greater. And kind of the most common increase band is somewhere between 25 to 50% versus where they are today. And you can see also that some organizations, just under 20%, they're planning for an even bigger increase. So what's not shown here, but we also found is organizations that generated more revenue in 2020, they tended to say they're planning to increase their budget in 2021 at a higher rate than organizations that generated less revenue last year. We also looked at kind of what sort of budget differences are there when we look at smaller companies versus bigger companies from an employee count perspective. We saw that larger companies from an employee count perspective tended to plan to increase their budget at a higher rate than smaller companies as well. So we all know on this call that many times these days, data breaches start with third parties, vendors, that the software systems we use can serve as an attack vector. So if you store data with a SaaS provider and they suffer from a breach, your data may be lost or compromised, and that could leave your business exposed to regulatory enforcement like the GDPR. And if a vendor doesn't keep sufficient access control over their system, an unauthorized user might breach their system and then attack your data. So we really wanted to understand what tech companies are thinking, how worried are they about their third parties. And one sign that organizations are actually pretty concerned about their third parties is that there's planning to spend more money to manage third-party risk in 2021 than they did last year. And some additional questions we asked, not on the slide, but that are interesting is, we wanted to see if organizations today in general are more worried about third-party risk versus, their internal environment. So we asked them, are you more concerned that your internal defenses aren't strong enough against bad actors, or your third party's defenses aren't strong enough against bad actors? And we really found that the results are neck to neck. So kind of equal proportions of organizations are saying, oh, I'm more worried about internal defenses versus those who are more worried about their third parties. Additionally, 84% of people in this survey, they told us that today they have a defined process in place to identify, treat, and monitor third-party risks. So you can see that organizations have a desire to mature their third-party risk management processes. So we asked people, what are the key drivers of your budget increase? And this is what we found. These results are probably not surprising to you, but what we found was the #1 driver, according to people in this particular survey, was changes to regulations around cybersecurity and data privacy. Actually, 86% of people, respondents based in the US, they anticipate that in the US, we will soon have a federal data privacy law similar to the GDPR. And they have said that we are anticipating this sort of regulatory change, and we're factoring this into our compliance budget for 2021. And what else? As Matt talked about, organizations are just using third parties more and more and storing their data in third parties and cloud services. So that is certainly a driver of them wanting to spend more focus on IT risk management and compliance. Additionally, this was outside of the survey, but we think that organizations may also choose to increase their 2021 budget because of COVID-19. It's possible that companies had to use their budget last year allocated before the pandemic hit to cover the cost of addressing the COVID-19 crisis. And so they've had to put planned initiatives on hold last year, and they're planning to revive those initiatives this year. So that's sort of, organizations generally want to spend more money on IT risk management, but what are they doing from a process standpoint, or in terms of specific actions? So we asked people some questions to see what sort of actions they have taken to demonstrate their commitment to IT risk management. And the overall picture we saw is that for the most part, organizations do really want to make a concerted effort to just get better at this. So, for instance, we saw that 92% of surveyed respondents said they want to use a risk management standard or framework like ones developed by NIST and ISO. 78% said, oh, we have clear roles and responsibilities and various owners for their risks. A significant portion said, oh yeah, we conduct risk assessments on a regular cadence, and we audit our internal controls on a regular basis. So, for the most part, organizations do want to get better. That's what we're seeing here. However, when I saw these high percentages, I did wonder if these are a bit too high. And the reason is because we asked people some additional questions on how well or whether they're struggling on some very specific steps of risk management. And we actually saw organizations struggle with a lot of the day-to-day activities. So what we found in our survey is that, you know, in general, a lot of organizations today are still having some significant challenges in managing IT risks day to day. You know, we ask a bunch of questions to understand how well they're doing in day-to-day tasks, and we'll show you those specific questions just in a moment. But the overall picture is organizations are not where they like to be. Nearly 2/3 of respondents today said they take an ad hoc reactive approach to managing their risks. You know, they conduct certain activities in response to events like an incident or an audit, but there isn't a cohesive approach or a cohesive process in place. Additionally, we saw that survey respondents are not able to get through their day-to-day work in a very efficient manner. 1 in 2 respondents say they spend 50% or more of their time at work on low-level administrative tasks, like data entry into their risk register and gathering evidence for audits. They're left with little time to do the more strategic work to improve their security posture. And due to managing IT risk in a fragmented way, 61% of all survey respondents told us they have experienced a data breach or a privacy violation in the past 3 years. So the overall picture is that, you know, there's opportunities to improvement, but the important thing really is we need to understand why organizations are managing IT risk in an ad hoc manner and why those challenges really exist. So, you know, several of our survey questions were designed to understand these things better. And I'll show you the data in a moment. But to summarize kind of the key things that we found that there's really kind of 4 reasons why organizations today, many of them, are managing IT risk in an ad hoc way. The first one is that security and risk management professionals, they don't have a great understanding of how well existing risks are being managed. They don't have a full picture of what controls exist in their organization or how effective certain controls are. Many organizations told us that they just have a limited understanding of their vendors' true risk profiles, and they have limited capacity to detect when a control has failed or it's not implemented effectively. And then finally, people are trying very hard and they're doing a lot of work, but they don't have time to do some of the more impactful work. People are bogged down in low-level administrative tasks. It's taking up for 50% or sometimes even more of their total time at work. So we also try to understand why organizations are facing these challenges and how can we remove them. So in that vein, we kind of found 3 things that offer some explanations. The first one is, you know, today it's very time consuming and tedious for organizations to gather critical risk and security assurance information, so they can't make decisions when they need to. Organizations oftentimes use a variety of systems through their IT risk management process, and it's hard for people to connect information silos because multiple systems are being used. And finally, organizations may want to have great processes in place, but they can't implement them because their existing tools just simply don't support these workflows. So what you see here is just some data on how respondents rated themselves and their organizations in being able to execute various risk management and compliance tasks. And this is sort of like these tasks are generally recommended by, you know, bodies like NIST and ISO. And it's basically a process, right, where, you know, an organization starts with identifying their risks, and then they make sure that controls are in place to meet their risks. Once controls are designed, they're actually tested and monitored. And anything that's not working, wherever there are gaps, those information and issues are captured and actioned on in a prompt manner. So we ask people, how well are you doing? And what you see here presented are percentage of companies that said, hey, we need some significant improvement in doing this. So, what you're seeing here is that about half of all companies struggle to understand how well existing risks are being mitigated, and they're not always sure where the issues are. So for instance, if a company struggles to know what controls are in place around certain risks, then they don't know how well the risk is mitigated. And if it's difficult or, they're not testing how effective a control is, it means that certain controls could have failed without their knowledge. So this is a slightly different question we asked. Again, it's around when it comes to managing security and data privacy risk arising from your internal environment, what type of things do you find to be tedious and taking longer than you'd like? And basically, there's a variety of things organizations struggle to execute because they are taking too long. So for instance, data entry is something that's quite tedious. And once, risk data is entered and documented, 46% said they still have trouble finding that information when they need it. Almost half of them said it's difficult and tedious to collect necessary information to test the controls, and so on. And so based on these results, right, one of the reasons all of this is tedious is because companies have to switch back and forth between multiple systems throughout their risk management process. And we asked people what type of tools they're using to document and track their risks. And what we see is people often have spreadsheets. In fact, almost half of people are still using spreadsheets to document and track their risks. But then also a significant portion of companies, they also have some sort of risk management software at the same time. And, if you look at these 3 bars that say risk management software, these actually add up to more than 100%. And so this suggests that companies may be using spreadsheets and some sort of risk management software as well, which again means that their data is fragmented. And that means it's hard to find relevant risk information when they need it. We also asked people a question to see what kind of challenges they face in managing IT vendor risk specifically. And the picture you see here is kind of similar to the last slide, but basically organizations have trouble getting complete and accurate risk information on their vendors. And that means that it's hard for them to know which vendors deserve, further attention, which ones really they should be looking at. And again, the reason they're having a hard time getting accurate information is just because collecting that information is really manual and really time consuming. And we also asked people, what sort of tools are you using to identify and manage IT risks from your third parties? And the results show us that they're using a variety of tools, and it's not, these different vendor management tasks are not done in a single place, and that creates some inefficiencies in their workflows.
JC, you want me to take this one?
Yeah, that would be great. Get some water.
All right, great. So Yeah, so I mean, a lot of important data there, and interesting information and feedback that JC just walked through. I think on this one, it's talking about this question is about preparing for audits and just which tasks take way longer than people would like. And I wish I could say that this is surprising, but it's not, and I think it's reflective of some of the information JC's already walked through. But locating evidence in support of audits, and finding that evidence when you need it is very, very time consuming for organizations, and that's very indicative in that the responses here. You can see that over 50% of the respondents looked at that and said, "Wow, that's taking way too much time, and it's not a value-added task." And the other piece is communicating with the auditor and some of the back and forth. And I think that too is reflective of a lot of what I've seen talking to companies. It's a real struggle to find evidence, not just in relationship to an audit, but also in support of your compliance related work. And then the communicating with the auditor, I think that the reason that one stands out is I don't think it's so much that it takes time to communicate directly with your auditor. It's the fragmented nature and the gathering the information while people communicate effectively with them that consumes a lot of time. So just moving along, then we asked, hey, how many people actually have a purpose-built systems for managing evidence, managing the collection of it? And you can see what people responded to here. The lion's share are leveraging file storage systems that we're all familiar with. This is very reflective of the conversations I've had over the last 3 years. It's this repetitive cycle of, OneDrive, G Drive, Dropbox, Box.com, people storing their information there. But ultimately, I think organizations are doing a great job of at least methodically storing it. That doesn't necessarily make it easy to find, and it doesn't make it easy to collect. It's very interesting and reflective of a lot of what we've seen over the last 3 years. And with that, JC, I think I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, sounds good. Apologies, everyone. I had to, there's a bit of noise in the background, so I'm just having to move to a more quiet location. Please bear with me.
The joys of, I'm sure we can all laugh at that. I don't know any of us that haven't had to to move around in this day and age to avoid the noise that kind of rotates around our respective households. So I'm sure everybody understands, JC.
Thank you. Well, so the other question we wanted to ask is to see if organizations have what kind of approach they're taking to monitoring, specifically, monitoring the effectiveness of internal controls they've stood up to mitigate, certain risks. And what we found is that audits is actually the default method organizations use to gauge the effectiveness of their internal controls. And continuous monitoring is actually not very common here. And again, I think this is the data is showing what it is, because many organizations, they are just struggling to get enough time to do everything they need to do to get through their audits. They really haven't had the time to evolve and mature their monitoring system. But again, if they're just relying on external audits to ensure that their controls are working, that just means their controls are working at a point in time. There's still all those other days of the year when there isn't an audit, when they just don't know if their controls are working or not, and that puts them at risk. And so this is just, our question around what tools they're using to manage their IT compliance efforts. And we see that the kind of more and more organizations are using software designed for managing IT compliance operations. But again, some are using GRC tools, and about 20% are still using spreadsheets, which is very manual and it's prone to errors. And so, from all the customers we've talked to at Hyperproof over time, something that comes up again and again is how much of their work time goes to really administrative tasks. But so in the survey, we wanted to quantify this. And so we asked people what portion of, the team that's responsible for risk and compliance management, what portion of their time is spent on low-level repetitive tasks that aren't a good use of their time. And this is what we found is half of all respondents are saying 50% or more of that team's time goes towards repetitive administrative tasks, which again, this is in itself is a problem, because if they don't solve this, then it's really hard to kind of set up, these other things like monitoring. And so, again, this is just a recap of what we talked about in this section and these questions that you saw. So basically, there's a few things that's getting in people's way, even though they want to manage IT risk in a more consistent, disciplined way. The first is that, there's a limited understanding of how well existing risks are being managed, because the information is not easily accessible and it's not complete. There's limited ability to assess the effectiveness of controls, and limited ability to detect when a control has failed or isn't implemented effectively. And part of all of this is that organizations are bogged down in low-level administrative tasks, so they don't have time to kind of lift their head up and start to fix these issues. And again, these challenges are kind of here because many companies today are just struggling with their existing tools. They're using a variety of different systems throughout their process, so they're not able to connect the dots between the different pieces of information. And so, obviously what we presented here is kind of in broad strokes. This is what's happening for over about 65% of the organizations, but some organizations are doing a lot better, and they're able to manage risks better, they're able to avoid security incidents better, and they're able to spend less time than the average organization at administrative tasks. So I think the really important thing is for us to understand what those better organizations are doing and doing differently from the typical organization. So basically, something we really wanted to look at is we wanted to ask the question, does the way you approach IT compliance at your company actually impact the business outcomes and the security outcomes you actually get? And what we wanted to see is how companies are approaching compliance today. Simply speaking, there's two different approaches that can be taken. One is compliance is a function that enforces the rules and regulations. We feel like, compliance is just something we have to do. We have to meet regulatory requirements and these compliance standards because our customers and regulators need us to. Otherwise, it's a barrier to market entry. So it's kind of treated as a necessity, but not embraced. Versus, on the other side, there are organizations that take a risk-first approach or an integrated approach. They critically examine their risks and they put controls in place to address their specific risks. They know they have to do compliance, but they embrace it. So they adopt these IT compliance standards, like frameworks from NIST and ISO, or even SOC 2, because they know it's the journey helps them mature their IT risk management processes and practices, ultimately making them better. So in that context, they really treat their compliance programs very differently. The focus is on ensuring that, you know, controls are functioning effectively and designed. They're not just checking off the boxes. So here's the data that we collected on kind of where organizations in our survey pool fall on the spectrum. We see that actually half of all survey companies are in this first bucket, where they kind of view compliance as something they have to do. They kind of view compliance as separate from their overall, you know, enterprise risk management program. Then we have this middle bucket. These companies are saying they do see having a solid compliance program as a benefit for reducing their risks, but their risk management and compliance activities are still typically conducted in separately in response to separate events. And then a very small percentage, 16%, these organizations here, they actually have an integrated approach. So they actually, you know, start with their risks first, and they align their compliance activities to their risks. And those things are tied together and coordinated. And so can you guess, of these three groups, which one is best at avoiding security incidents? Anyone? Well, it probably is pretty obvious, but we did find that when companies take an integrated view and approach on the way they manage their IT risks and tie compliance activities to the risks, they do better. They're better at avoiding security incidents than those who, you know, companies who kind of separate compliance function and the risk management function. And then this kind of middle group is somewhere in the middle. And of course, it's really, really difficult to avoid data breaches. Most CISOs today just operate under the assumption it's going to happen at some point. But then it's about, what do you do once it happens? How can you minimize the damages? We found that when there is a compliance lapse, organizations that have aligned their risk and compliance activities, they lost a smaller amount of money in total on average compared to organizations that view compliance as a function that enforces the rules, conduct their activities separately. So we're starting to see some data that there is a real business benefit to kind of managing your risks and compliance activities in an integrated way. And then further, we also found that when companies take an integrated view, they tend to spend a bit less time on low-level administrative tasks compared to companies where, you know, compliance is viewed separately. It's something they do because they have to. So basically, we decided to take a look at the specific actions and behaviors and see where there are differences, right? So, and we found that organizations that manage IT risks in an integrated way, they adopt certain practices that help them respond faster to changing risks and get work done faster than the rest. So what you see here are the key differences in IT risk management practices between the first cohort, those that take an integrated approach, and the second cohort, those who view compliance as a function that enforces rules and regulations. First of all, organizations that take an integrated approach, they tend to have a process in place to track compliance with policies and risk mitigation controls. So they're better from they embrace processes. They also tend to embrace technology. They have better technology that supports an integrated risk management approach. They tend to conduct internal audits on a regular basis, more so than the second cohort. they're able to map more of their controls to their risks, so they can see what risks are still outstanding and which ones are not mitigated well. And then additionally, organizations that take an integrated approach, they are twice as likely to have software that is purpose-built to help them manage the evidence they need for audits. And additionally, they're also more likely to have multiple methods of monitoring in place compared to those who manage compliance and risks in silos. So with that, I want to turn it back to Matt to share a few steps and key practices to help you take a more disciplined approach to managing IT risk. And with that, back to you, Matt.
All right, great. Thanks, JC. Yeah, so just wanted to provide, some thoughts on how to, improve this disciplined approach to IT risk management. And I think it starts with something that JC's referenced, multiple times throughout, the research, and it starts with actually, adopting, one of the great compliance standards or frameworks that are out there, NIST, ISO, SOC, and using that as a guideline, not looking at it as a compliance or regulatory kind of labor, but looking at that as a great kind of standard to actually sit there and mitigate your IT risk, and really looking at it in that light. And then and so I think that that's really kind of critical. And the great thing about NIST and ISO and SOC and a variety of frameworks out there, including CMMC2, is that they're really, you're taking the thought leadership and insights from folks that have been in this space for a long time, and understand where those risks reside, and leveraging those things versus trying to learn them on your own. It's a great way to kind of head off some of the IT risk. So IT governance and starting with some of these frameworks, we think is critical. Two, we've talked about this quite a bit. Things are very fragmented, and you saw that in a lot of the research that JC just walked through, where it's hard to do a kind of disciplined approach to IT risk management when your risks are in one place, your controls are in a spreadsheet somewhere, your artifacts are over in your G drive. Ultimately, I think it's important to look at how to either connect those disparate silos, or potentially actually house them in one or two solutions to sit there and solve for this. Having them completely disconnected the way they are so many times today just makes a disciplined approach to mitigating these risks, very, very difficult, even though I know everybody on this call and outside of this call go to extreme efforts, to sit there and be as disciplined as they possibly can be. It's just that the technology is not necessarily supporting them the way that people would like to see it. Three, and we'll focus on, really evidence collection. It's a huge, as you saw in some of the research, it's a huge area of administration. It's a manual task more often than not. It's consuming a lot of time. So anything and everything that can be done to automate, the collection of evidence is part of it. Also efficiently reusing that evidence across your different control sets, especially if you're leveraging multiple frameworks to make sure that your information is secure and that you're mitigating risk. So many of the frameworks overlap with regards to the evidence that's required. And so understanding how to lever that stuff and ultimately automate that evidence collection, limiting the actual manual burden, non-value added tasks, so that these really high level professionals can focus on the larger issues, is going to be a critical part to ultimately solving for this. Four is ultimately we all use a lot of different technology, and we see this repetitively. I know, talking to the marketplace and talking to customers and prospective customers all the time that people use Jira, people use a lot of different tools, but there are a lot of repetitive tasks in managing these things, and unfortunately a lot of these tools don't work well with other tools. And so we think one part of it is you need tools that work well and play well with Slack and Teams and Jira and all the other tool sets that we use in our environments every day to be productive. But past that, you need something to help automate, the repetitive tasks wherever possible too. So many times, when I've talked about this with different companies, it comes down to spreadsheets and calendars is the way to remind one another about what's due when, and that's just not really a sustainable way. And so I think finding ways to streamline that part of it as well is really important. And finally, and it maybe goes without saying, there needs to be effectively that pane of glass or whatever you'd like to call it that allows you to see the total scope of work and understand, what work actually needs the most attention. Because what I've seen so far in talking with a lot of different companies is they're completely overwhelmed on an overall work level. And so the trick, that part may or may not be going away, but ultimately it's where's the biggest issue at hand. What do I need to really focus on to protect my organization? And so having the ability to actually see all of that is critical to make the right decisions on a week-to-week basis. So I'd like to just pivot very quickly to this is very much a Hyperproof thing, and so but we've been noodling on, and we're a software company, just in case you didn't know that. But not surprisingly, we have a lot of engineers. They focus and think about DevOps a lot of the time. And we thought about that concept, about this iterative process of always improving, always getting better, and really how that can be applied to the compliance space and to security assurance as well. And so we coined the term CommOps, and we really think that this is a way to think about solving, for some of the problems that have been laid out in the survey as we went through it. And I think there's the place we want to be, which is I think we all strive and endeavor to be in a place where compliance and security assurance is managed consistently week in and week out. That's where we'd like to be. But we, at Hyperproof believe there's some fundamental steps that and things that products need to do in order to be able to get us there. I think one is, there needs to be an actual platform out there, a security assurance platform, one place where the frameworks, the controls, all of these things are defined. But the platform itself has to do a lot more than that. We have to make sure that seamless, that the workflow we talked about, the task, the integration to the other applications where people conduct their work, that needs to be seamless. And, we can't expect people to work outside of the tool set they use every day. Therefore, the task that might be required for compliance related work should be in Jira. And people should be able to conduct their work in the platforms that they tend to work in already. And so making sure that aspect of it's seamless, and that the collaboration that is always ongoing in compliance, is easy to do. Another piece is the automated evidence collection that I've spoken to before. So automated evidence collection, the ability to actually not take away that manual task, add that time back to someone's calendar so that they can focus on more important things, is going to be a real important part of making CommOps work and achieving, continuous compliance. Another piece is continuous testing. As you automate the evidence collection, all of that has to be tested. A lot of that's done manually today. Getting into a place where we can actually create scripts, test that information, make sure that, if there is an issue, that it's escalated within the organization is going to be important. And we believe if you solve for those three things, you're much, much closer you're where, I think we're where all of us want to be, which is this continuous compliance and security assurance space. But unfortunately, the world continues to change. We continue to grow as organizations. We continue to acquire other organizations. So, there's still another step, and it's always an iteration to ComOps where it's, you need to extend. You need to be able to handle, when you're entering into a new market and there are different regulations or compliance requirements. How do you not recreate the wheel and recreate the same amount of work in a different area? So the extensibility of the solution is important. And ultimately, we see this as a process. ComOps is not once and done, the same way as development in today's world is agile. And, we release software every 2 weeks. Well, ComOps is an iterative process too. It never stops. We continue to iterate on it and continue to improve. And having a platform that can actually help facilitate that's critical. And of course, what's Hyperproof focused on? That is what we're focused on, just in case you didn't know. And we're focused on helping organizations actually achieve, what we just described, and look forward to resolving a lot. See the research change as a result of the work that we're doing, as well as a lot of other good organizations are doing too. And with that, JC, I think I will wrap it up and hand it back to you. I would like to just on my behalf, thank everybody for their attendance. And I think maybe we're going to try to entertain some questions if there are some with the remaining few minutes. But I just, in case I don't get to say anything else, I'd like to thank you for your time. I know it's valuable. Really appreciate it. And JC, back to you.
Well, I guess the same from me. I just want to say the same thing. Thank you for attending this, and really hope that there are some interesting findings that spark ideas for you. And there's some, we have a lot more benchmarks in the full report that you could take a look at and potentially leverage to either, build a business case, to purchase new technology, or to hire staff, and to just understand how you're doing versus others in the industry. So I hope this was helpful. As I said in the beginning, but in case you didn't hear it, you will all be receiving an email from Hyperproof with the full report. We'll send that to you. If you have any questions about the research or about Hyperproof, feel free to reach out to either myself or to Matt Ladle. Our emails are on here. And really, that's it. Let's see if there are any questions. I'll just wait for a moment, but as of now, we don't have any yet, Matt.
Okay. It's yeah, so it's okay. It's a lot to absorb. But I'm sure as you get the report, everybody, please, as JC already said, feel free to reach out to JC or myself. We really, I know both of us geek out on this particular subject and enjoy, thinking about it all the time. And if there's an opportunity to talk to anybody on the call about it at a later date, we'd love to. And again, just thanks so much for your time. And you guys have a great Wednesday. Happy Wednesday again.
Thanks, everyone. And yes, the slides are available. You can access them when you go to watch the on-demand webinar. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.